And it was kind of a precursor, I think, to my own really stubborn personality that I just wouldn't leave. I knew it was embarrassing. I was embarrassed myself. But I was hungry for a world that I could not find in the places that I came from. And I knew that the movement was for me not downward mobility, but upward mobility. That my life would have been either over or really driven by the kind of despair that I came from had I had to stay where I was raised. So that framing, I want to say that to you because that's the framing for my own work as a social activist. It is not that the ideas and the vision of that work hasn't been transformative, but it's my history that propels me to do the work in the way that I do. And it's my worldview. I don't want to forget where I came from, and I don't want to lie about what that history is about, because I think that that history is invisible, but often actually a reality for many more people than myself. I used to think that it was me by myself and there was nobody that ever came out of my kind of background until I began to talk about it. And then I would realize that so many other people had had similar kinds of lives, similar kinds of histories, but had felt themselves alone in that history and were very, very cautious about what they were willing to reveal. What it also did is create for me, from the very beginning, a different idea about a gay agenda, about what I thought gay politics, as it used to be called, was about, and what I thought it needed to be about. And it also gave me a hunger and a need for a vision that was radical enough to name the problems and still have hope. To actually be able to talk very seriously about whether or not the work you were doing was about transforming the world or patching it up. And that's been really critical to my thinking for a very long time. And it will be a lot of what is still embedded in this conversation tonight. But I want to start by talking about sexuality because I think too often the issue of sexuality disappears at the intersections of class, race, disability, gender. Somehow sexuality becomes an afterthought, a kind of secret pleasure, it might be serious when you're coming, but other than that, it's not really a big deal. And what does it really have to do with economic justice? I mean, let's get serious. We've got really big problems here, and how you have an orgasm isn't really very impactful for anyone but yourself. And I think that the diminishing of sexuality is in a political dialogue is really a dangerous thing. So I want to start by talking about it because I think that it's too often trivialized and made fun of, as though sexuality is simple, as though we don't live our own histories in the bodies that we carry our identities within, as though it doesn't mark us. I have not had what I would call a simple life or an easy one, but I have to say that the only time that I ever considered killing myself and tried was when my politics around lesbian and gay liberation conflicted with my erotic identity. When I thought that when I realized that I was a femme and that I was attracted to stone butch women, and that the lesbian feminist movement of that moment thought that that was a betrayal, a pattern and a duplication of heterosexuality, was kind of a joke, but really not okay, and if you were really going to keep it up and keep bringing your partner with you to things, we're really anxious here and we don't like it. when I felt that the movement that I was most passionately involved in creating was at the same moment a movement that I couldn't with integrity be a part of because my sexuality betrayed that movement. That was the only moment in my own life when I not only contemplated suicide but tried to. When I survived that suicide attempt, I determined that I would never not talk about sexuality again. That it was one of the most critical things that people struggle with alone, and that the humiliation, either of how we feel about our own desires because we think that there's something wrong with them, or because of the way people act about our desires, means that sexuality is never taken on in the way that it needs to be taken on. It never has integrity as a political dialogue, and it's never seen as valuable in trying to change the world. And even though we have huge examples that are not just personal, like the story I just told you, of what that intersection looks like, and I think the AIDS epidemic is a really perfect point of examining what it means to have sexuality as one of the places where people can't tell the truth. Those of us doing AIDS work used to say that transmission was about secrets or about ignorance and shame. But it was always about what had to be hidden or what wasn't known because you had no access to the information that you needed. So your desires then, whatever your understanding of your own sexuality was, put you at risk. It's not acceptable for people to die because they have to not tell the truth or because they don't know about how to protect themselves around desire. And it's not acceptable to have pleasure be the price, or the lack of pleasure be the price that people have to pay in order to be safe. It really matters to me that sexuality is talked about, because I think that when we can't talk erotically about our own practices and our own desires, it has a profound effect on us politically. Because we are afraid of being named by others around our desire. And if we're vulnerable in a variety of different ways, as people of color, as women, as trans or genderqueer people, as poor people, if we know that our sexuality is already going to be seen through that lens, which is probably not going to look so good in terms of how the culture talks about it, then what that means is that we remain silent as the way to try and protect ourselves from the things we fear people will say about us were they to know anything about our erotic identities. And that outside naming shapes and has a profound effect on how we see ourselves. It isn't just from the outside and what we fear from the outside in terms of targeting. It's very real in terms of how we understand our own complicated identities, histories, and bodies. And it also usually means that we have no way to explore our own desire. We have no way to learn it. You know, sex, I know people want to make sex like natural. I think that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard of. Now that doesn't mean you don't want it. But frankly, you know, you don't just kind of make up in your own mind how to have sex, then you go and do it. Really like that. And you know, one of the things I realized when I was, you know, when I thought about my own queer identity was that I always called it the kiss I could never find. I couldn't find who I wanted. I didn't know how to find who I wanted. It wasn't obvious to me. What I knew was that who I had was not working for me, but not where to go, and I had no place to look. I mean, you know, it was a different moment in time, and queer stuff just wasn't even, you know, you didn't even name it. But it meant that there was no way to learn what the kind of shape of my own desire was and to practice desire. Good sex takes a lot of practice, in my experience. Having been a sex worker, I can say it professionally, because I got paid for it, because I was good.